What's happening, people? I am what you need. We're doing a live stream. Several different things are going down in boxing, and I want to talk a little bit about the pivot. All right. Um, I spoke about it earlier on. I did a video on it, just a short video. Somebody named Ernie Schaefer, could be the actual Ernie Schaefer, was cursing me out, calling me Earth, Wind, and Fire ass or something like that. Talking about it's much more than the pivot for Errol Spence to beat Terrence Crawford. I don't think he understands what I'm saying. So I'm going to educate him and other fans about the pivot in boxing. You would hear certain fighters speak about the pivot quite a lot because, this is well known in boxing. Your feet are really what help you to win fights. You just standing directly in front of your opponent, it doesn't always work. So you have to do different things. Now, even standing directly in front of your opponent, you can do many different things, okay? But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk specifically about the pivot and pivot work and how it actually allows winners to win fights and how a lot of boxers out there do not actually know a lot of secrets about the pivot and how you can make a fight very easy. And one of the fighters who you can look at for this is Dimitri Bivol. Go ahead and look at video after video after video about Dimitri Bivol. The difference between Dimitri Bivol, there's a lot of great jabbers out there. But the difference between, say, Amigo Cotto and a Dimitri Bivol is Dimitri Bivol he knows the pivot. All right? Colonel Whitaker knew the pivot. Yes, he used to dip and, he'd slip shots and stuff like that and make you look stupid. But he also, he was the master of the pivot because he would be turning you in a circle and you just never catch up to him, right? Another master of the pivot, of course, is Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather is a master of the pivot. Now, another guy who pivots very well is Terrence Crawford. Terrence Crawford also knows how to use the pivot quite well. However, he doesn't actually use the pivot as well as Errol Spence. Errol Spence actually, this is a strength of Errol Spence, and that's why I said if he wants to beat Terrence Crawford, he has to use the pivot. When he was fighting Terrence Crawford, besides being half a step slower than Terrence Crawford, he was also attacking Terrence Crawford down the center. For some reason, he decided he was going to dog him and just go straight down the center. And that's not what Errol Spence generally does. He usually attacks his opponents off of angles because he usually makes use of the pivot. So that's why I advised Errol Spence, and I said it was that simple, that he would have to attack Terrence Crawford using the pivot off of angles. Okay? The pivot allows you to enter your opponent's space without being directly in front of him. Okay? I'm going to give you an example of some pivots. If you look at Vasily Lomachenko, if you look at Manny Pacquiao, they are obvious examples of aggressive guys who use the pivot. What they do is they would first slip their opponent's offense, and then they would pivot to the side of their opponent while coming towards them aggressively. They would pivot to the side of their opponent and go weak side on their opponent and therefore exploit the fact that their opponent can't hit them and they can hit their opponent. Pivot work is key. Now, what is the pivot? So a lot of people don't know. A pivot is when you turn. It is a turn. You have tight pivots where you just pivot off of the ball of your foot or the heel of your foot even. And there are large or wide pivots where you can be circling the entire ring, slightly changing the angle every time. And so you're circling the ring. That's called wide pivots. So the thing about it is, if you are fighting, say, for example, in fact, guys who cut off the ring, what they do is they take away certain pivot angles from opponents. So if you're doing a wide pivot, this guy can cut off the angle by himself pivoting into you and at a certain distance. Or he may step to the side. Now, there's a difference between the pivot and step around. Pivot is where you're moving off the ball of your foot and you're literally turning at an angle off the ball of your foot. Whereas if you are stepping to the side, it's just a step. You step to the side, so you sidestep, right? You can step around. Stepping around is not pivoting. It's where you actually make a step and you go around your opponent. So there are different things in boxing. And I just wanted to make it crystal clear to people because a lot of people do not understand when I say use the pivot, and the pivot is the key. Pivots, They take away angles. That's what they do. Or they create angles. Okay. Um, let's take for example what happened with Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence. Errol Spence was going down the wrong line because Terrence Crawford would move back, but he would move back in an angle. He would move back and pivot back. He wasn't going straight back. He was moving back to an angle to the weak side of Errol Spence when Errol Spence would attack, pivot to the outside of him, and then attack him weak side. Errol Spence to take that angle away, what he should have done, but he was too eager to attack. What he should have done was he should have come in himself off an angle. That would have caused Terrence Crawford to make an adjustment and pivot off of another angle so he can get Errol Spence back in front of him, or get Errol Spence at an angle which is advantageous to him. Okay? Coming straight down the center is not always the best thing. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes, again, you don't. So Errol's excellent at pivoting. Excellent at pivoting. You know? And I didn't understand why he didn't use that. Even if he was the weaker fighter of the two, I noticed that Terrence wasn't really hitting Errol when Errol was moving backwards because, again, Errol was pivoting. When you're not directly in front of your opponent, or your opponent, when you are not just an object there in front of your opponent. If you go straight back, your opponent, you're still an object in front of your opponent. But once you're not an object in front of your opponent, there are two things the opponent can't really do effectively. One is the opponent can't get to you effectively because he has to set to come to you. And the second thing about it is that the opponent, especially if you are using distance, you're changing up the range all the time, it actually offsets your opponent. So your opponent's never set to do anything. And this is key. Floyd Mayweather basically made his career off of this. Floyd never really stood directly in front of anybody. He was constantly changing his angles with short, small little pivots and side steps. This is how he kept his opponent constantly off balance. He'd also fight from range a lot of times, so his opponent had to reach him to get to him to start with. Terrence Crawford's a similar kind of guy, but he can do a lot of things just like Floyd. But the point is that I'm going to give you a list of other opponents who used pivot work. Okay, you have Roy Jones Jr. used pivot work. You have James Toney, who did tight pivots. He fought on the inside, and he would be able to pivot around an opponent, mid-range inside. You got Canelo Alvarez, who pivots on the inside. Now, once you are a certain range from him, he has to get to you, and to get to you, he has to trick you. He has to set traps. That's a whole other story for another day. And we're not talking about trap setting right now. We're talking about pivot work. So, suffice it to say, did I read the scripture? I didn't even read the scripture. Pause. Let me get to the scripture first. I always start with God, and I just got straight into this, and I started talking about pivot work. And I really should have gone into scripture first. So let me go into scripture first, and then I'll go to pivot work after, right? Psalms 119, verses 1 to 3 says, "Happy are the people of integrity who follow the law of God. Happy are those that obey his decrees and search for him with all their hearts. They will not compromise with evil. They will walk only in his paths." I should have started with scripture. I'm so sorry about that. Anyway, back to what we were saying. But before I continue, let me just give you why I said this scripture. A lot of times we're not straight. We're not honest with ourselves. Even when we are doing something that's wrong, we need to be honest with ourselves. You know what I'm saying? That way we keep a clear conscience. We keep our hearts clear towards God and ourselves. So I just wanted to say, I admonish each and every one of you guys to keep a clear conscience for yourself and towards other people. Try to always have a clear conscience about things, meaning you don't have any issue with anybody. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's God or man. All right, now, so you try to keep yourself walking in the right direction, meaning you're trying to be just, you're trying to do good for people. All right, let me get to what we're saying. So the pivot work is critical in boxing because, that vehicle, and not many people can really do it properly. All right, not many people really got that game down because there's a certain way to pivot. You can't cross your feet. You most of the time when you're boxing, you're circling your opponent, so that means you have to pivot. But there's tight pivots. There's certain pivots. There's certain movements you make that come off of pivots, or certain movements that get you into a pivot. And all of these things you have to understand. All right. And I can tell you, Errol Spence has a good understanding of that. And if he implements that particular strategy against Terrence Crawford, take for instance Dimitri Bivol versus Canelo Alvarez. I heard Sean Porter say something, and I really don't agree with it. Now, I'm gonna cover some other topics too while I'm talking about this, but I don't agree that Dimitri Bivol is not an elite fighter. I don't agree with that at all. Sean Porter said that, and I can't understand how he could say that for the life of me. Sometimes boxers say some really dumb things, and I don't understand what they mean. Dimitri Bivol obviously is an elite fighter. Elite just means the top, the creme de la creme, right? And in his division, which is the 175-pound division, he is one of two of the elite fighters in the division. The other elite fighter is, of course, Artur Beterbiev. Okay, and I would love to see those two fight, but again, Bob Arum with Top Rank. You know, Bob Arum always does this shit. You know, it's always difficult to make a fight with Bob Arum, with the fighter that Bob Arum feels his fighter will get beat by. So Bob Arum don't make no fights. You know, this guy's just annoying in my opinion. All right, anyway, Dimitri Bivol should have faced Artur Beterbiev. He has not been able to do that. He beat Canelo Alvarez, beat John Pascal, he beat a number of named fighters. Okay, he's an elite fighter. Is he a Hall of Famer? No, but he is an elite fighter. And I hope that Sean Porter knows that. But you know, it is what it is. You live to learn. Dimitri Bivol, and then Sean Porter comes back and says Canelo Alvarez would beat Dimitri Bivol if they had a rematch because Canelo, when he's all fired, cylinders firing, you know, he would beat Dimitri. Don't say that. Don't say that. If he could beat Dimitri Bivol in a rematch, then rematch Dimitri Bivol and show us that. Don't tell me what you believe. I don't care about what you believe. Show me. Boxing's a showing sport, so I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that Canelo could beat Dimitri. If he could beat Dimitri Bivol, then he should fight Dimitri Bivol. Dimitri Bivol ain't got a problem with him fighting him. You know what I mean? Do a rematch. Back at 175. Let Dimitri Bivol bust his ass again because he'll beat his ass again. Why? Dimitri Bivol got the pivot work. Well, y'all keep on watching at his 1-2s, his 1-2-3s. Y'all keep watching at his left hooks. Y'all keep watching at his jab. But y'all don't understand the difference between Dimitri Bivol and say a Caleb Plant. And Caleb Plant's a good fighter, don't get me wrong. Is Dimitri Bivol pivots much better than Caleb Plant. Dimitri Bivol knows how to maintain range much better than Caleb Plant. Dimitri Bivol knows how to pace himself much better than Caleb Plant. He may not place his punches as accurately, but Dimitri Bivol, because he's a bigger guy anyway, he's sharp, he's quick, and on top of that, his foot activity is incredible. Again, if you are doing pivot work, you have to have really good foot activity. Pivot work doesn't mean that you have to go walking all these great distances. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So, for example, I'm right now in front of the camera, right? Let me show you how easy a pivot is. A pivot don't take much for me to just offset myself and be slightly off of the camera right there, right? It's just a slight movement. It's a very slight movement. Boom. Bam. Boom. See, it's simple. It's pivoting is not this big set of stuff that people say. There are big pivots. There are tight pivots. There are small pivots, okay? You have to understand, you have to know all of these things. You have to understand the angles, right? I was listening, I was talking to people. I was listening to this guy, what is his name? Bullet, right? And so some of these guys use terms, I don't know if they know what they saying. That's the problem. So you're saying that you're going to attack a guy off an angle, all right? Your angle of entry is this angle or whatever angle, right? You got to understand what that is. And you have to be able to pivot into that angle, okay? And the question is, you're attacking your opponent. You don't have to counter your opponent. You just attack. So the dude's talking about you could throw a left hook and take away the angle. And Ninja, I seen. Let me explain. Floyd Mayweather versus Carlos Baldomir. Canelo Alvarez versus Miguel Cotto. We've seen these guys attack these fighters with lead right hands, right? And pivot out the way. They go underneath the hook. You just go under the hook. You know what I mean? You attack the guy, go under the hook. It's timing. Everything's timing, right? So if you can pivot, you have a tremendously bigger advantage over almost everybody in boxing because there's a lot of angles a lot of boxers don't use, and it's so simple. They take away if you have a difficult opponent who is he's too fast for you, he's too quick, his feet quick. You know, he's able to get in position fast, then you're not going to try and do what he's doing. You're not going to try and match him for speed. What you're going to do is pivot and take away the angle. It's that simple. And then you can start reestablishing your angles. So that's how boxers are able to cut off the ring. You don't have to be faster than the other guy. You just have to have good timing, and you got to have good pivot work. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. So boxing can be made very simple, and Dimitri Bivol makes it very simple by changing up the angles. When Canelo tried to come in with his left hooks and his power shots, Bivol, when he's not covering up and not using his defense, is using his pivot work to take that away. So he's neutralizing Canelo's power, and then he's establishing what he wants to do in the fight. So Canelo might be quicker than Bivol. He might even be sharper than Bivol. But because Bivol has a better knowledge, and this is why we talk about the knowledge of boxing, because Bivol has a better knowledge of how to approach things and take away angles and implement angles, he's able to always be a step ahead of Canelo. Okay? And that's something, once you start boxing, that's the first thing you got to get under control. After you learn how to throw a jab, how you learn how to move a little bit in boxing, you do the box steps, you do those little things. The next thing you need to start learning to do after you get your stance and everything together is move in the ring. Understand the different divisions of the ring, the different quadrants of the ring, and how to move around in the ring. That's all you want to do. You ain't throwing no punches, nothing. You're just moving around in the ring, because that fundamental, all right? Ernie Schaefer's was a guy that used to stand right in front of his opponents most of the time, right? He counter punch, whatever. He do a little pivot work too, but nothing really like what I'm talking about right now. All right, he didn't have an elaborate understanding of, listen to what I'm saying, the elaborate understanding of the pivot, how to use certain pivots, what certain pivots are used for, what's the purpose of this pivot, right? Because he fought mostly in the pocket, right? When you are not fighting in the pocket, or when you choose to navigate, okay? I'm using a specific word for a specific reason. Navigate where you want your opponent to be in the ring. You're going to become the ring general. You have to be 2-3 steps ahead of your opponent. And the only way that's going to happen is by tricking your opponent down a wrong line of attack. All right, that's what called trap setting. You're setting up your opponent to go down the wrong line of attack. You're several steps ahead of them because they don't realize what you're setting them up to do. And in so doing, once you've evaded their attack, you may want to add in, with your evasive maneuver, a counter. So the counter is a part of the defense. It's a flow into the defense. For instance, if I'm pivoting out the way this way from my opponent, because my opponent is coming at me here, right? And I pivot out the way this way, right? I roll out the way of my opponent, right? I'm a southpaw. So I roll out the way of my opponent, but in rolling, I could throw a hook with the roll, right? If my opponent is attacking me straight on here, right? It's coming down the line this way. I'm sort of like this to him, right? I could just, if I'm using the shoulder, I can use the shoulder here and roll the punch. The punch rolls off my shoulder, right? Or I can present the shoulder here, but while I'm doing that, I'm check hooking him at the same time, right? It looks something like this, right? It's a roll. It's a shoulder roll, but it turns into a check hook. You see what I'm saying? And what you guys have to understand is, if you can defensively make a maneuver with your feet, it automatically puts offense into it. So if I'm stepping off a pivot, I could step off the pivot this way and get out of it, right? But I could throw offense on that at the same time. As I'm getting out of it, I throw my hook. You see? And that's what the cool thing about pivots. Pivots allow for all kinds of things to happen. Terrence Crawford, for example, when he moved back off an angle as Errol was lunging in, was able to check hook him and catch him with a certain shot. Then he changed his position. He went from southpaw to orthodox to catch him with a right uppercut as he was coming in attacking. So what I'm saying to you guys is, when you have good defense, the offense feeds off of it easily. So the key here is to learn what they call footwork, but I'm going to get more specific. The specific aspect of the footwork I'm talking about is pivoting. Okay? The pivot. And when you look at the exceptional fighters out there, they may not be the fastest guy, Mike McCallum. They may not have been the fastest guys in the world. They may not have been the strongest, the most powerful guys in the world. But they were very effective with what they did. And, you know, when you talk about guys like, even Mike Tyson to some degree. Mike Tyson was more of an aggressive fighter. So he would pivot mostly. He would do these wide 180-degree pivots, right? He would go from one side of your body to the next side of your body, 180-degree pivots. But what you have to understand is, and he was very quick, what you have to understand is those pivots come in handy at times too for when you may be defensively needing to move from one side of opponent's body to the next. It can be used for defense or it could be used for offense. You see, because off of the pivot work, he would throw a left hook to the body. He'd rip a left hook to the body, get in position, rip the left hook, right? But you don't have to rip a left hook. You could just go from one side of the body to the next to evade something that was coming on one side of the body. So what I'm trying to say to you guys is there are all kinds of pivots, different kinds of pivots. He didn't have to use a pivot. He could have sidestepped the guy and make him run into something. But he didn't. He chose to use a pivot instead. And what I'm trying to explain to people is pivots are so useful. And the thing with Errol is Errol really mastered that. So that's why, you know, if I was him and I'm doing a rematch with Terence Crawford, I want to win the fight. Maybe I can't knock out Terence Crawford. Maybe this fight ends up being at 147, like Terence Crawford is saying. The thing that you do best, you should be doing in the fight. Errol needs to more do intelligent boxing, right? Don't just try to bulldoze Terence Crawford down with your power and strength, but use your boxing IQ and use your pivot work, use your timing, and you should be okay. Now, I don't think he can beat Terence Crawford at 147. He definitely has a great chance at 154 because Errol Spence cannot make 147. Okay, it's just what it is. I'm not going to go into the details. I think they're going to fight at 154 no matter what Terence Crawford and his team says. They're probably going to fight at 154. And so I do think I've been hearing rumors that Errol Spence is looking for Floyd Mayweather to advise him. I think that's a great thing. That's a great move because Floyd is a master of pivot work. And Errol's not backward either. He's really good at pivot work himself. So, I mean, there's going to be things Floyd might suggest to him that he utilize. If they're fighting at 154, that's going to be a much more exciting, much more interesting fight. You can pivot going forwards. You can pivot going backwards. So it'll be a very interesting fight. They'll still have to make adjustments, both fighters, but I think Errol can do much better against Terence Crawford. Absolutely, I think he can do way better than he did in that fight there. I think he's going to be sharper, quicker, you know, much more flexible in his strategy. If you have to change your game plan, change your game plan. You know what I'm saying? But I think he's supposed to be sparring Tank or something like that. That's a good guy to spar. Sean Porter did pretty well against Terence Crawford. Crawford, of course, much more measured, smarter fighter. Was stronger, kind of stronger than Sean Porter too. But I do think this. I think that Errol Spence has something that Terence doesn't exactly have. Errol can do some things in the ring I never seen no modern fighter bar Tank. Tank, who else did it? His pivot work is ridiculous. Errol has ridiculous pivot work. If he sticks with that, you know, bar everything else, right? Sticks with that, intelligent, uses his pivot work, he could have a good chance of winning the fight. Because let me explain to you guys what I'm talking about. So I've never really seen a whole bunch of fighters do 180-degree pivots like how Errol does it. Smooth, in balance. You know, Errol didn't seem in balance against Terence Crawford in this particular fight where he fought Terence Crawford, but Errol's generally an imbalanced fighter, in my opinion. Okay. Um, so it was kind of weird seeing him out of balance and stuff. It could have been Terrence making him reach or whatever. Or maybe he was eager to just reach Terrence Crawford. I don't know what was going on in his head. But generally, Errol's a guy that's in balance. Smart fighter, don't get hit so easily. Even if he does get hit, he's defensively aware, so he snaps back out of a punch. Terrence was able to beat Errol because, in my opinion, Errol wasn't fighting him smart. And Errol's a smart fighter, and he fights smart. So it was kind of weird to see all of that happen and unravel. Um, and I think Errol's going to approach Terrence in a much smarter way. So I don't like people. It's more than just pivot work. No, it is pivot work. That it comes down to pivot work. Period. And yes, I understand you have to be a lot more smarter in how you approach and attack your opponent, and it's your timing and all those other things. But and you may want to set traps, whatever. But it won't happen if you don't have proper pivot work. Because it doesn't matter what game plan they have. It ain't gonna work if he's just standing in front of Terrence or Terrence is making him stand in front of him. It's not gonna work. So the key to everything, if Errol is to beat Terrence Crawford, is to get that pivot work. That pivot work that he been working on when he was in the Olympics, the pivot work that he started using when he was on the come up. You got to use that pivot work. You can't be going all the time toe to toe with people. I don't care what Errol Spence says. When he boxed Danny Garcia, I'm not Danny Garcia. Yes, Mikey Garcia. Sorry, he did excellently. I saw all kinds of things this guy could do, and I think that he needs to go back to something like that and box with a certain degree of aggression, but you're boxing the guy. You're not trying to bang with him and just go toe to toe and just throw blows. No, you wanna use some finesse. You wanna use some footwork. You wanna use that pivot work that you're really good at doing and cutting all those different angles. You wanna not stay in front of him. Derek James was telling you not to stay in front of Terrence Crawford, and you knew what to do. You knew what kind of pivot work you needed, and you just decided I'm gonna bulldoze him. You're not gonna bulldoze guys like that, man. You have to. You have to. You have to. You can't be just going toe to toe with a guy that's gonna set traps for you. He's not standing in front of you. He's not standing in front of you. He constantly is moving to the side. When he gets you hurt, he's gonna come at you. But for the most part, he's coming to the side. He's stepping around you all the time. So you have to step around him too. And sometimes you have to catch him when he's stepping around. And I was surprised that he didn't do what I thought he was going to do in that fight. But it's cool. Hopefully in this one, he'll be able to do what he's supposed to do. And we see an Errol Spence that is Errol Spence. And if we see that, I think he's going to do very well. Do I think he's going to beat Terrence Crawford? I think Terrence Crawford going to make the necessary adjustments when he realizes what's happening. And I think Terrence can always pull out a fight because Terrence has a lot of different tools in his toolbox. Now, not to say that all his tools are refined and they're all firing at the highest level. No, Terrence does take punishment. He does get hit with shots, but he's tough too, so he can take a shot. So Errol to beat Terrence Crawford, he got to be on his pivot first of all. We can't talk about nothing else. He got to be on his pivot. Will he be able to do more with Terrence Crawford with respect to pivot work? Absolutely. Because he cuts certain angles. Terrence Crawford don't even cut. He can do pivot work that Terrence Crawford don't pivot with. So that's where he can get in position and make the fight kind of go his way if he can handle Terrence's speed and quickness. And again, he understands what Terrence is doing, right? Terrence is step around him. Terrence is trying to pivot. So Terrence may not pivot around him, but he definitely would step around him. You know what I mean? Sidestep him, those kind of things. So that's why I said it's very important to understand the pivot. So like guys like Dimitri Bivol, they're special guys, man. Their footwork is the footwork of Bivol, a simple footwork. Simple footwork. No set up, big set or nothing. It's just a small little step, a small little angle. Shift the angle a little bit to get the advantage, get your clear shots, get your 1-2s off. That's a very, very smart, very, very skilled fighter. Okay. Bevo's not somebody you can just joke around with. So when I heard them saying that Charlo is a better fighter than Bevo, I can't agree with that. I can't say that. I don't know. Let Charlo fight Bevo, then we know. You know what I mean? But I can say that Charlo does have a lot more tools in his tool bag than Bevo does. But is he consistent with his tools in his tool bag? Not necessarily. Charlo also is able to work off of certain pivots. He doesn't do all the pivots, but he does do certain pivots. And what really got me what really got me saying this guy's the goods as Mel is the second fight with Castagna, where I mean he was ahead of Castagna every step of the way in that fight. He was dictating from the beginning to the end when he stopped him. He was always at those key angles. He was doing all kinds of things to push the guy back in the center of the ring. And Castagna is a very aggressive fighter. With Canelo, Canelo's a much more deliberate fighter. So when we talk about like Charlo versus Canelo, we're talking about two fighters who understand boxing. Canelo has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. He's a very tricky fighter. Canelo himself is very good at pivoting, also masking distance. And he's been able to use precise footwork to pressure fighters and get them into corners and stuff like that. So Canelo's a tricky dude, very skilled. His problem was consistency, his foot cardio. And he's gone up in the mountains now. He's training at high altitude to get that consistency, to get that cardio that he'll need for this fight with Charlo. So I expect him to come prepared to go a full 12 rounds if he has to with Charlo. Probably be quicker and stuff like that. Charlo, the advantage that Charlo will have against Canelo is Charlo's foot activity is a higher foot activity than Canelo. Charlo moves his feet quite a lot. Even if it's just these little pivots or these little steps he makes, he moves his feet a lot more than Canelo. So he has a better foot activity, kind of like Bevo. And he, of course, he moves as is necessary. He's kind of efficient in how he moves. So all of those things are going to work for Charlo in this fight. But will he walk into certain traps that Canelo sets? That's the question. If he doesn't bite the bait and do that, and he's engaging, and Charlo likes to rumble himself. So if he gets caught up in liking to rumble, Canelo gonna put him on his ass. I think he's gonna put him on his ass. Canelo's not one of those guys you play around with. Like mid range, you don't play around with. You're either gonna be dealing at a distance. If he gets into his range, your ass is grass. So you have to keep him on the outside somewhat, or you deep tight in the pocket with him, working him. So Mel need to understand that. Bevo did that, and that's how Bevo clearly won the fight. But if Charlo can do that, keep him kind of distance. Don't let Canelo lock up his arms and start hitting him in his spleen and shit. You don't want to be getting hit unnecessarily by Canelo. You don't want him early in the fight closing distance off your jab and tagging you to the body. Canelo was able to do that pretty early against Billy Joe Saunders, and you saw what happened to Billy Joe. So Canelo's one of those guys, you can't just let him do what he wants. You have to be aggressive as well. You have to kind of take it to him. You have to make him think about what he's going to do, how he's going to approach. You got to be able to counter him. And to do that, you have to have the pivot. You have to have active feet. You got to have the footwork is what gets you there. And nothing else is going to get you. And that's why I said the pivot is key. And Charlo has a decent pivot. He don't have the greatest pivot in the world, but he can pivot. He definitely can pivot. And he moves. He sometimes moves a little too excessively because he wants to gain the rumbles and stuff. He makes fights a little harder than it should be. If he moves clinically against Canelo, he shut out Canelo just like how Bevo shut out Canelo. Because Canelo's the same fighter. It's just he gonna have a little bit more stamina and stuff as he's going on the stretch. He's gonna have his power for sure. So if Mel lapses and he's thinking, oh, I can take Canelo's power, Canelo's gonna break him down and get him out of there. Mel also has good body work, so that's another thing that's interesting. Of course, I'm rooting for Mel to win. Do I definitively know who will win this fight? No, because Mel's coming up from 154. I don't know how he's going to adjust to the weight at 168. But I am still picking Mel to win because, like I said, for foot activity, I think Mel has that, those micro steps and all of that stuff. He got that. So that's what's going to give him the jump on Canelo, get the angles off of him, and be able to pick him apart sort of from range. When Canelo does eventually, because he will catch up to him, close the distance, Mel will have still something for Canelo, you know what I mean? So if Mel can withstand Canelo's power, I think Mel's going to be fine. This is one of those fights for him to win. People talking about Mel stopping Canelo, I don't see that. So there was a rematch between Joe Joyce and the Chinese heavyweight guy, and he stopped Joe Joyce in the third round. I didn't talk about that in shorts, but I heard about it, and I know that Richardson Hitchens, sorry. I know he beat Jose Zepeda, comprehensively beat him, and that's pretty impressive because Jose Zepeda is a good little fighter, and yeah, Richardson Hitchens beat him comprehensively. He comprehensively outpointed him, so it is what it is. This is the new breed, the new generation. Richardson Hitchens going up against, like, say, Teofimo Lopez or Devin Haney. Those are the guys, that generation. Should be an interesting fight when it does happen. But he's definitely a force to be reckoned with so far in the division. So 140-pound division. He might go up against Subriel Mateus. Might beat his ass. You know what I mean? Because Richardson Hitchens, he's the goods. He really can box. He can really fight. He got decent power. So that's a good fight that's coming up. With respect to other fights that happened, or are going to happen, I'll say that the fight I'm looking forward to besides Canelo versus Charlo is, of course, the rematch with Errol and Terrence Crawford. But Savannah Marshall versus Clarissa Shields. I know it hasn't been announced. Well, I'd love to see a rematch between those two. The women's boxing has been always very interesting, action-packed. They give you everything you want. So you should support women's boxing. Is there anything else I left out? I don't know. I'm not going to talk about no rumors. I'm not going to talk about crap like that. Devin Haney versus... oh, yeah. Let's talk about that. Devin Haney versus Regis Prograis. Again, Regis Prograis got power, man. Dude got power. He's sharp. He's fast. He don't have the biggest pivot work in the world, but he's explosive, fast. He's sharp. Devin got those angles and all that kind of stuff. So how would it go with Regis Prograis versus Devin Haney? I don't know. Devin Haney looks bigger. He does look stronger now. So I don't know. I don't know what to expect. With respect to, will we see a knockout? Will we see a points decision win by Devin? Will Devin knock out Regis? I don't think that could happen. Regis is pretty tough, but you never know. Will Regis knock out Devin? We don't know. But that's a good fight, and one in which we'll see where Devin's at the end of this fight. A lot of people predicting that Devin will beat Regis. I mean, we'll see. I don't know. I like Regis. I like Devin. I like both fighters. I picked Devin to win, but at the same time, I want to see what Regis can bring to the table, and we'll find out. We'll find out. I don't want to see Regis really lose his title, but let the better man win. It is what it is. I like both fighters, like I said before. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Will Devin have more power at 140? We don't know. We'll have to see. So that's what I got for you guys. Tank is talking about he got an upcoming fight coming. I really don't care. I'm going to tell you the honest truth. I don't care about Tank like that because Tank hasn't fought the top guys. And he doesn't seem interested in fighting the top guys. He's just interested in making money. And that's just not what boxing's about, in my opinion. I'm going to catch you guys later. I am what you need. Peace.